Welcome to the Better Than Bitter Divorce Podcast, where we flip the script on divorce and show you how to have a more amicable divorce resolution. I'm your host, Tanya Licklider, a divorce coach, a certified life coach, and the mastermind behind the Better Than Bitter 5-step game plan course, where I help individuals build a pathway towards a more amicable divorce resolution. Each week, I'll bring you uplifting stories from people who've successfully experienced amicable separations, proving that divorce doesn't have to be a battleground. Whether you're overwhelmed with grief, struggling with custody and co-parenting, or just dealing with a high conflict individual, this podcast is here to guide you towards reclaiming your life and being what I know is possible, better than bitter. Welcome to episode 3 of the Better Than Bitter podcast. I am so excited today to have Darlene Taylor with us. She is a former licensed social worker and a certified coach. She has over 15 years of experience in helping families navigate co-parenting after divorce. She specializes really specifically on creating these amazingly supportive environments for children. And she's even written a book. It's called It's Not About Us, Co-Parenting Survival Guide for Taking the High Road. She really combines her personal and professional insights to provide practical strategies for co-parenting. And I'm so impressed with Darlene because outside of her co-parenting coaching, she is this amazing obstacle course competitor, meaning that she competes in these Spartan races, and not just one, but she'll do 3 back to back to get these incredible medals. And so I will tap into that desire and that drive that she has post-divorce into really picking up and creating new communities. So she has an incredible daughter who she loves to spend time with in Los Angeles, and she's a dedicated advocate for single parent families. And she, just like me, works to break the stigma of divorce today. So welcome, Darlene.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that lovely introduction. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We had such a nice conversation when we first met. We both are coaches for Vesta Divorce Concierge Group. And in that network where they really help individuals getting divorced match to the right coaches or lawyers or mediators, Darlene and I got to meet. And in our meeting, we really just connected because both of us really do believe in that amicable divorces are possible. And so I'm going to let Darlene tell her story today. And I'm going to have lots of questions. But first, I just, why do you believe that your divorce was an amicable divorce? And what does that mean to you?
I believe it was an amicable divorce because it did not start out that way. It was rough at the very beginning. He says that he was I initiated the divorce and it was a surprise to him, according to him. And so he was not happy about it. And it was very rocky for the first couple of years. But I went into it knowing that I wanted to have an amicable divorce and have an amicable relationship with him because of our daughter. We had, at the time, our daughter was 2, and I knew that we had, a long time to be in each other's lives. He and I mean, for the rest of her life, obviously, but we were going to have to work together closely for a long time. She was very young, and I really wanted to figure out a way that we could do that was going to protect the peace for both of us, right? Like it was so ugly at the very beginning. And I'm like, I just was thinking to myself, I cannot do decades more of this. Like that was just an awful thought to think about. And I didn't want to harm our daughter. At the time she was 2 and she didn't really know what was going on. And, to me, I was like, we've got to figure this out before she starts to understand, what the dynamic between the two of us, and it starts to really damage her. And so I really went into it with this idea of, what can I do? We weren't going to be in therapy together, but, what could I do and how could I try to make this as amicable, as workable, as cooperative as I possibly could? Thankfully, he and I never had a conversation about it, but thankfully, I think he finally got to that place as well. I think we both really were focused on our daughter and wanting to not damage her as much as possible. Neither one of us came from parents of divorce. And so I think we were both really afraid of what that was going to do because we saw friends and, other families in our lives that had been really damaged by divorce and parents who couldn't get it together to work together. And so I think we both kind of migrated to that space of like, okay, we have to do what's best for her. That's why the book was called It's Not About Us, because I think we really embodied that when it came to her.
Yeah, so you talk about being super rocky and at the beginning and even for the first couple of years and I definitely stress to individuals who listen to anything that I talk about this amicable resolution and I say to them, "Hey, listen, the divorce process is not going to feel warm and fuzzy. I'm not telling you that you're going to be loving on your soon to be ex through the divorce process. But what
Right.
I am telling you is that the outcome, the
Yes.
result can be amicable and that you have to get through the tough stuff.
Yes.
So, can you talk to me about when we talk about the tough stuff and relate to the audience that might be feeling what you were feeling and like how you managed to kind of get through that? Like, what were the things that you were applying in your own life and in your own process that got you to that other side?
I think the first thing I had to do was admit that even though I had initiated the divorce, that I was hurting and I was grieving and it was a loss and it was hard and I was sad. I was depressed and I think I was just trying to get through the process of the divorce and not really think about, what I was feeling or why this was happening or really, really sitting with those emotions. And I think that was probably the first thing that I did that got me on a track of like, okay, we'll be able to work, I will be able to get to the other side of this, because you have to really just acknowledge what's going on. It's a loss. It is a loss, no matter how you look at it, and you are grieving, no matter how you look at it. A lot of times we associate grief with death, and that's not the only thing that you grieve. And also, divorce does feel a lot like a death. It's the death of a marriage, the death of a family, the death of a future that you thought you were going to have. And I think that you have to really acknowledge that and give yourself the time and space and grace to grieve that. I also think you have to do the work on yourself, do the work of healing on yourself. And I'm a huge advocate for therapy, obviously, as a therapist. But, if therapy is not for you, then do whatever works for you to work through those feelings and get to that healing. That's really crucial. I think that's the only way you're going to get to amicable on the other side, is if you do the healing and the work for yourself.
Yeah, I talk a lot about moving through your emotional divorce before you step into your legal divorce because so many people are looking for a couple of things that you said. Like, one is, how do I prevent long-lasting trauma for myself, but for my
Right.
children? And number two is like, how do I save myself money? And the
Right.
first thing I talk about is that, well, you need to really move through this emotional divorce before you step into your legal divorce because of the fact that guess what? If you are an emotional mess when you step into that legal negotiation room, it's going to be emotional decision making and emotional responses and emotional reactions. And those might not be logical, rational thinking, right? It's that you're a
They
therapist.
rarely are.
It's the amygdala. It's that sympathetic nervous system completely going around and not allowing you for access to that prefrontal cortex, so you can calm
Right.
your body, so you can have more mindfulness and awareness of how you are showing up. And so, tell me more. Like, I want to know a little bit more of the details. You told me a little bit in the past about your ex. Why don't you share with our listeners kind of what he did for work, why it created such a stress on your co-parenting, and kind of how you all, as part of this process, were able to come together, because we really want to hear from you in terms of your expertise, because a lot of people don't have these easy lives, right? Where like, oh, two parents that work in 9 to 5, you can, do 2 days, or, 1 week on, 1 week off. Like, that's just not reality. You have people who are working in all sorts of capacities, and they have to come together to create a plan. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more.
We got divorced in the state of Ohio, and you have to have a parenting plan. You have to file a plan with the court, right? So I sat down with my attorney, and we, she pulls up the typical plan of like, Monday every other weekend, and Wednesday every other one. I don't know, all of the things that's like I guess the normal plan that people use. And I just looked at her and said, this is never going to work. My ex-husband is a college basketball coach, and he travels constantly. Was really at that time, I think, only 1 or 2 months of the year, not even consecutive months of the year, that he did not travel. So he was always gone, schedule changing all the time. And so I was like, there's no way that we're going to be able to keep a schedule. We have to have a schedule. I get that, but we're not going to be able to keep a schedule. So I knew at that point that if I wanted our daughter to have quality time with her dad, I was going to have to be flexible about what the schedule looked like and making changes to the schedule. And so, and that was really difficult, because I think going into it, I was, trying to grab onto the things of divorce that were going to be positive. And I was like, okay, well, we'll have a schedule, and I'll be able to have this time for myself, and I'll be able to plan. And no, that didn't happen for me. So it took a lot of communication. And I think even working out our very non-traditional schedule took some time as well, because at the beginning, I was just taking on the responsibility of being the flexible one. And I was, sort of letting him make changes to plans like at the last minute. And then after a while of that, I was like, wait a second, this isn't necessarily fair to me either. Like, we should be able to make I should be able to have a little bit of lead time with the schedule, right? So then we worked it out to where we would talk of every Sunday and like, okay, what's going on this week? What does this week look like for you? And so the day-to-day schedule was where we really had to be flexible and really had to get creative as far as like holidays and things like that. Those were set in our parenting plan, and we did very much stick to those. But even with that, I think the thing about these parenting plans and really being amicable is understanding that life happens. You can have the best plan and life happens, and just being practical and reasonable and compassionate about things. We were living in Ohio, and I didn't have any extended family in Ohio. So if my mom came to visit or my sister came to visit, even if he was in town and it was technically his time, he was like, well, of course, Sammy can be with you. I want her to have time with her extended family. And so it was, those kinds of things where, of course you could stick to the letter of your parenting plan and say, no, this is my time and this is your time. But at the end of the day, who is that hurting? That was the question that I had to ask myself. Like, yes, we had this parenting plan, and I would have been well within my rights to say, you know what, this is the parenting plan. This is your day. Can you get her that day? No. Oh, well, sorry. But that only hurts her. Then she doesn't get a chance to have a relationship with her dad and to really build a relationship with her father. And I know that is something that's really important for her. It's something that's really important for every child, especially when you have a parent who is there and wants to have a relationship with their child. What kind of mom am I to stand in the way of that? And if that means that I have to be a little bit more flexible, and that, I have to have a little bit less of a set schedule than other people, well, that's what you do as a parent, right? You make sacrifices.
I know. And I listen to you, and I listen to all the people that I talk to about parenting plans, and people get so stuck on well, it's his night,
Right.
and he should be coming to pick her up.
Yes.
Why is it that, so and so says that they want to go off because they want to go off on a holiday with their girlfriend or whatever, and I'm stuck here with the kids,
Right.
And kind of shifting that mindset. Like, how do you work with clients that are really kind of still in that place of bitterness, and that's still in that place of just not being able to move beyond that when it comes to these parenting plans?
Yeah, I think a lot of times what I see in those instances is that the parent that I'm working with, is really still stuck at viewing the other person through the lens of being their partner, and all of the ways that they sort of failed them as a partner, and not really looking at them as a parent. And that's one of the things that I really talk to parents about, is separating the partner from the parent. This person, maybe was not the greatest husband or wife to you, but that doesn't make them a bad mother or father, right? And so you have to be able to look at those things and keep those things completely separate. And I also encourage people to be the, I call it kind of, one of you has to get on the high road first, right? It's very rare that both of you are just going to be sitting up there like, okay, let's do this the right way, let's do this well. One of you is going to have to get on the high road first. And what that looks like is giving what you want back. You know what I mean? Giving the grace that you want back, giving and at first it may feel like you're the only one who's giving. But I think that for both people who want an amicable solution and an amicable relationship, it's going to feel really bad for you to be the one that's constantly being the jerk if this other person is constantly being reasonable and being workable and and being flexible with you. So I encourage them to communicate and to communicate as openly as you can. I always say that if you lead with vulnerability, oftentimes it's met with grace, and meeting other people's vulnerability with grace. Again, sort of modeling what you want from them. When I started traveling with our daughter, I would make sure that he had the itinerary of, our flights. And I would call when she was little. I would call or send a text like, hey, we've landed safely. You know what I mean? Did I have to? No. But that's what I would have wanted if he was traveling with her, and it's not about me checking in with him. It's about him knowing that his daughter is safe. And what parent doesn't want to know that their kid is safe, no matter who they're with, right? And so it's those things. And I think it's hard, especially at the beginning when you're really still dealing with a lot of your pain and your own grief, to remember that, this is not just your ex-partner, this is your child's parent, right? And to respect that role and respect the role that person has in your child's life, and not do anything to get in the way of that. And it can be difficult. I mean, I am not saying by any stretch that I was perfect at this or that it was an easy thing to do. And, and you're going to get it right sometimes, and you're going to get it wrong sometimes, and that's okay too. But just, but striving to do those things, I think, gets you on the high road.
Those two tips that you just gave, one is about making the difference between the parent and the partner. And I love that if people can just reframe their thinking around the parent and the partner, and making sure they're separating those out, and knowing that that parent is wanting to do what's best for their children, and that you want to have that child receive as much love and support as possible.
Absolutely.
And I like the other thing about the initiator. The second point you made is really about the initiator. Like, somebody has to take the high road to say, this is the way we should be considering working together, and that this is about our child, and focusing on what's going to be best for you. And you're going to get back what you put in. I have this great webinar that I do on 6 communication techniques to get you what you want in divorce. And a lot of it has to do with, just like you said, it's about being vulnerable. It's about being compassionate. It's about being accepting and being flexible. And it's also about being assertive in a certain level of way. It's like, it's okay to be assertive in a supportive environment where you're being friendly about it, but also setting boundaries. And
healthy boundaries are great.
Boundaries are great, right?
And you're really having to carve out a new relationship. And I think that's the other piece that people have to remember. Like, you're moving out of this relationship. You knew how to be partners with this person, whatever that looked like, whatever that looked like. But you're still their partner. You're not their romantic partner, but you are still their parenting partner. Yeah. And you really have to think about, okay, what do I want this relationship to look like? Obviously their boundaries in this relationship are going to be different. So be very intentional about creating those, how are we going to communicate? And really kind of for yourself, sitting back and thinking about, what do I want from this person? What do I need from this person to be a good co-parent? And then thinking about, and maybe even asking them, what do they need from you? What do they want from you, as far as being, if you are able to have that conversation, asking them, if you were to just describe me as a good co-parent, what would that look like? What would that mean? And then sharing your perspective with that as well. And hopefully that gives you something to shoot for, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was such amazing advice. And and you don't necessarily always get it right, but you are going to have to be co-parents with this individual for as long as your children live, right? Which is
Yes.
going to be longer than you live.
Right.
So do you
And
have
that
a
is what
choice?
yes,
You know,
that is
you have a
what
choice. You can have a positive relationship
right.
and have it be full of love, or you can be vengeful and unhappy and angry, disappointed and bitter. And then that's on you. That's like
Right.
going to be your back nine,
Well,
right?
and
So,
but the other piece of that too is that is thinking about, because everybody's like, oh, I would do anything for my kids. Would you though?
yeah,
Would you though? Because when you're deciding to hold on to that, when you refuse to let go of that, when you refuse to work with this person that you are going to be tied to for the rest of your child's life, you are putting the heaviest burden on them.
yep,
Because think about it. My thought was, I don't want for my daughter on her wedding day, should be the happiest day of her life, to be stressed out because we can't be in the same room. How
yeah,
unfair is that?
yeah,
How unfair is that? And
yeah.
you were the grown-ups. You know what I mean? You were the grown-ups first. You were adults. You should be able to get it together. Like, sometimes sometimes I'm that forward to people. I'm like, get it together.
No,
Like,
I am too. I am
just
too. And I'm so that way. Actually, to be honest, like my ex and I, we eloped because his parents had such a bad relationship and we just didn't want
right.
these two individuals, you know,
Ruining your day.
ruining our day. Yeah. I mean, and
And that's nothing that you should even have to think about. Like
I
it's
know, I know. I
you're
remember
parenting
on
your parent at
I
that
know.
point.
I remember on his sister's wedding, and it was like her shower, and I was walking with his mom, and she's continuing to bitch about her ex-husband. And meanwhile, they are both remarried and had
Right.
been married for 30 years. And I remember turning to her and being like, okay, you got to let this go.
Are we still talking
Are
about
we
this?
still talking about this? This is your daughter's day. Like, just let it go. You've been happily married for 30 years. Like, why are you still holding on to this?
The gift that you give your children by being able to have an amicable relationship with their other parent is immeasurable. I knew that, but little things have happened in our daughter's life since we moved to California that have really solidified that for me and just really made me understand what a gift it is for us to be able to work together, to be in the same room together, to have a birthday dinner with her. He invited me over to his house just this past Mother's Day. He's repartnered. They're not married, but they've been together forever. They live together. He cooked us steaks and wine and cake for Mother's Day. And he was like, he invited me over. So it was me and his new girlfriend and our daughter and her son all
That's
around the
fabulous.
table. And it was great. And it was, and that kind of thing is just a wonderful gift that we can give to our daughter. And I feel like, unfortunately, as good and amicable and wonderful as you can make a divorce, children of divorce still miss out on things. It's just reality. It just is. And so for us to be able to give that back to her is just a little something that I feel like is hopefully going to fill in some of those holes and those gaps of things that she has to deal with as a child of divorce that other kids don't.
But I also think, and just the positivist in me, like, I also believe, and we're going to go into this because you've got bonus people in your life. Your daughter
I
has
do.
bonus people. So they might have missed out on some things, but they've gained others. And so let's
Right.
move the conversation to the bonus and to
Yeah.
the things that divorced children get to have that other kids don't, because it's not all negative.
Yeah, no, I always say nobody ended up in therapy because they were loved too much, right? And so I've
Exactly.
always been, I even when we first got divorced, I knew that, her dad was going to move on at some point and I was going to move on at some point. And my thing was I didn't need his new partner to like me at all. I just needed her to be good to my kid. And as long as she was good to my kid, then I am happy to have her in her life because the more love and support that she can have, the better. And it just happened that he partnered with somebody who was willing and wanted to also, sort of join the team of, Team Sammy is what I call it. Her daughter's name is Sammy, is of co-parenting her. And she and I have become really good friends. And so that's a relationship that, that I wouldn't have, that I value, tremendously outside of just, her being sort of one of the pseudo co-parents in the picture. We have a friendship and, I've actually been married twice. and divorced twice, unfortunately. But my second marriage, he has two daughters, and I met them when they were 9 and 11, and they are now 21 and 23. And we are no longer married, but they started calling me their bonus mom. They didn't like step. They said had bad connotations. They didn't like it. So they started calling me their bonus mom, and I call them my bonus babies. And I got to retain those relationships when, even after we got divorced. I did that because when we got a divorce, when he and I were together, before I ever met them, their mom asked to meet me. And at first I was not thrilled about that. I write about this in the book. It's kind of a funny story of like our first meeting. But I, met her, and she was lovely. And, I actually thought, gosh, this is probably somebody that I'd be friends with if she wasn't his ex-wife. That's kind of weird. But what ended up happening is, after he and I split up, I reached out to her and just said, hey, I just want to make sure that it's okay with you that I still stay in contact with the girls, as much as you're comfortable with. But I love them. I care about them. Sammy loves them and cares about them. And she was so wonderful and so open and said, absolutely, they adore you. And so, she and I have become really good friends. She's one of my closest friends. And so, because of this second divorce, I have three of the most important relationships that I will have in my life because of that. And so and Sammy's got siblings that she never got to have. Right. And so because of just the way that I have been lucky enough to surround myself with people who understand that, divorce doesn't always have to mean loss, that there are some things that you can gain from that. And I've been very blessed to be able to keep those things in my life and those people in my life.
This is the second time that you've told me that story, and I have the chills, like the second time around. And it just makes me so happy to hear about, first of all, just how much courage and strength it must take on your end that you have been able to establish all these relationships. And I came from a very similar experience with my dad and my mom, and my dad's on number 4 wives. And they all get along. Well, wife number 3, not so much, but like my mom and my dad's second wife, and now my dad's current wife and his second wife, they're all one big happy family, and they all support, us as a family, meaning that my kids call second bonus grandma Grammy, she's their Grammy.
Yeah.
And you're right. There is not ever too much love that can be given to children, and there's so much reciprocation. There's not too much love that can be brought back to us, right?
Yeah. And it's such a wonderful contrast for kids of divorce to see that, yes, out of this loss, there is loss, but there are other beautiful things that can happen. And I think that in a way, and my oldest has kind of said this, that it reinforces her belief in family and in love and in relationships. And, because it can be really hard, especially if the kids are older, for them to witness their parents divorce and, and to carry that with them as, sort of that legacy of divorce. And so I think that kind of balances that out as well. So
I totally agree. So I ask all of my guests the same question at the end if they have been married. And I have written a blog on the 20-year marriage contract with the option to renew. Just wanted to throw that out there to say, if you started your marriage and you've been married twice, but you knew that this was a renewable contract versus till death do us part. How do you believe you would have shifted in your approach to your marriage? Or do you believe that that's something that should occur, like having some level of contract and understanding that like this might end? And if it does, we've already built in place what's going to happen. So it doesn't have to be a litigation battle in the courtroom because we've already thought about everything.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's an interesting question. It's hard to think about, because we have such, to hold on to those traditional ideas of obviously till death do us part. So to go into it thinking about an end feels negative, but I think it's practical. I think it's practical. I think it's reasonable. And I think, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I like the idea of being more intentional about what your choice to stay married, your choice to, I always say, like, you get married, but you choose that person, and you need to choose that person every day. Like, that's every single day you're choosing. And so I kind of like the idea of, like, yeah, let's check in every year. And maybe that's what your anniversary should be. Let's check in every year. Hey, this is what's happened to us this year. How's it going? How is this still working for both of us? Because if it's not, maybe we need to make some adjustments. And I think, that's the way I sort of approach relationships now, is to not just assume, that we've made this decision that we're going to be together and that's just it. And we're just going to, full steam ahead. Life happens and things happen and people change and needs change and desires change. And so being very intentional about having those conversations and making sure that it's still, the fulfilling relationship that you want it to be for each of you, I think is really smart.
Yeah, I mean, I just love the idea of just an option to renew. So not
Yeah.
saying that the end is coming, it's just
Right.
that the end could come and we've already built in what would happen if it did. And, and maybe if it became a societal thing, like children would know, well, there's a chance that my parents are going to decide that, they're going to go in different ways, but like, it's not like it's going to be some horrible thing. They're
Right.
just going
Not the
to,
end of the world. Right.
it's, but it's like something that it's in our society now. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It was, again, I think it came to me when I was running one day and I'm like, well, what if, like, would I have shown up for my marriage differently if I knew that I had this option to renew
Right.
out there, and that, do I work harder? So we renew up,
Yeah.
let's do it
Right.
again.
Yeah. No, I love that.
Just a different thing. So I just want to give a summary of today, giving our audience and listeners the 3 tips that I really pulled away from. I mean, we got so many great nuggets today, but the one is just like someone has to take the high road and really establish this constructive, productive co-parenting relationship.
Right.
The other one is, like I said, separating out the parent from the partner, because moving through divorce and into a post-divorce relationship, it's a different partnership.
Yes.
And it's a parent that you're talking to whose only best interest should be their children, right? So it's a new relationship. And then, as we talked about bonus, I just love the idea that there is never too much love that's given to children, and children that are coming in, like you said, your bonus children, how much love you can give to them, and how much love that your child can get from bonus children or from bonus parents, and
Right.
how I just embracing it versus coming from a place of jealousy or coming from a place of anger or bitterness, and the non-accepting aspect of moving on in your life, right? So we're all hoping to move on towards a brighter future, and it just feels so much better to love than it does to hate.
Yeah. And everybody's easier to work with when they're happy. You know what I mean? Like, that's,
Absolutely.
it's, I'm happy that her dad has moved and has this wonderful relationship with this great partner, because he's easier to deal with when he's happy. Everyone's easier to deal with when they're
Everybody's
happy,
doing.
right? So it's like, so it's a little selfish on my part, because I'm like, that's for me supporting this, that makes my life easier. We all are, selfish in the sense that we need to do what we have to do to protect our peace. Part of this, the way I co-parent, yes, it's absolutely 100% for my daughter, but it's also to protect my peace. I didn't want to be angry and dealing with somebody that I was arguing with every day. Like, that's so draining. Like, who wants to spend the rest of their life carrying that around? So, do it for yourself, do it for your kids, but also do it for yourself, so that you can get to a place where this is not a relationship that has to drain you for the rest of your life.
So, Darlene, tell our listeners again the name of your book and where they can find it. And just to let everybody know, we will have information on that in our show notes. So you can go to the show and look at this episode and you can connect with Darlene. But tell everybody, Darlene, again, your book and where they can find it.
It's called It's Not About Us, a co-parenting survival guide to taking the high road. You can find it online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, I think Walmart, on most online booksellers. On Amazon specifically, too, there is also a guided journal to help you put some of the practical things that you read in the book into practice in your own life as a co-parent. So you can find it there as well.
Great. Well, Darlene, thank you so much for being our guest today. It was such a great conversation. Good luck in your next Spartan race, since that's, I
Thank
guess,
you.
coming up again this weekend.
Yeah, actually, it's just so funny. Just really quickly, the
Yeah.
bonus being the kind of connecting the Spartan with my bonuses. My girls are not really into Spartan racing, but they have all three decided that they will do a race with me at the end of November. So the four of us are going to all do a Spartan race together, and so it's really cool for me to be able to share this thing that I'm so passionate about with the three of them, and it'll be the first time that the three of them have been able to be together since 2021. So it's going to be really special.
Oh, that is so awesome. Well, good
Yeah.
luck to you on that.
Thank
And
you.
thanks again for joining us today. And everyone go and get Darlene's book.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today for episode number 3 with Darlene Taylor of the Better Than Bitter podcast. I wanted to emphasize the 3 top takeaway tips that I got from Darlene's interview today. Number 1 is flexibility. There is no cookie cutter way for you to create the right co-parenting relationship for you, meaning that there might be very hectic, busy work schedules that you're having to deal with. And if you keep your eyes focused on your children and knowing that the goal is to get them as much quality time with each parent as possible, you have to build in flexibility. Number 2, be open-minded. And I know that it's very hard sometimes to embrace the significant other of your ex, but it can really pay off and give you bonus children on the other side, because you might be marrying into somebody yourself that has children. And so making sure that each child that is coming to the table is being loved, whether you're your children who are being loved by others or you loving other people's children. So just be open-minded and remember, the more people that love your children and the more children that you can love, the better. And the third thing is that you need to separate out your partnership from the past to your parenting relationship in the future. Because the way that you parented when you were partners is going to need to evolve. So you need to leave behind some of the issues that you had in your previous partnership and focus on rebuilding a new co-parenting relationship that is not inclusive of whatever baggage you may have had in the past. So those were the 3 top tips that I got from Darlene today. And we really do appreciate you all tuning in, and we hope to see you on the next episode. Thanks for tuning in to Better Than Bitter, Navigating an Amicable Divorce. Whether you are at the beginning of your divorce journey, midway through, or even done, we want the stories from our guests to give you hope that an amicable resolution is possible. If you'd like to dive deeper into today's episode, check out our show notes for a full transcript, reflections, and links to learn more about Better Than Bitter's coaching, courses, and how to connect with our fabulous guests. If you're ready for more support, you can head over to betterthanbitter.coach. There you'll find details and additional information on our 5-step game plan multimedia course, our one-to-one Zoom coaching, group coaching, monthly memberships, events and retreats, and a whole lot more. Plus, we've got a ton of free resources like our monthly newsletter, our private Facebook group, Instagram channel, and a library of articles and free webinars to help you along the way. When you go to our website, you'll be able to schedule a free 45-minute breakthrough call. Remember, we're here to help you reach an amicable resolution. Find your courage and believe in your brighter future, because you know what? It is possible. At Better Than Bitter, we measure success by what we give and not by what we get. So let's change the divorce dialogue together. It's time to be better than bitter.